Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Monica Copeland. I'm the MDI Network Director at Inclusive. Welcome today for our Spotlight on Credit Unions Serving Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. We're so excited to have this webinar today. It's the first time we've had this topic here at Inclusive, and in recognition of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Island Heritage Month. It's a wonderful time to showcase these credit unions. We have leaders in the field, we have really fascinating communities that they work with and their stories to share. So we're so happy that you're able to join us and that you're interested in this topic. Today's agenda, so that you guys are familiar with what's going to happen. I'll just cover a few housekeeping announcements. Then we'll have opening remarks by my colleague, Kathy Kim, the Director of Inclusive Capital. Then it'll be followed by a facilitated discussion with our guest speakers, Michael Chan, the Board Chair of Northeast Community Federal Credit Union, Fred Docdocil, Branch and Business Development Coordinator at Mabuhay Credit Union, which is a division of Nikkei Credit Union, and Charity Figuerres, CEO and Manager of Lānaʻi Federal Credit Union in Hawaii. And then we'll definitely have time for Q&A. So as we're speaking and having that facilitated discussion, you're welcome to type in the chat or the Q&A at any time with your questions, and then we'll try to take them at the end. But we were hoping to have a really robust conversation with the speakers today. And then as you're hearing things, feel free to respond or ask them any follow-up questions. In terms of housekeeping, we get one of the most common questions we get is the webinar being recorded? Will you get the slides? We are not heavy on slides today, but you will get the deck and the recording after the event. Anybody who registered will get that as a standard part of what we do. And then we'll also have a special raffle, actually. It's a new thing that one of our partners, the Illinois Credit Union League, and their partner Invisent, is raffling off a $50 gift card for one of our attendees. So that name will be randomly drawn, and we'll let you guys know in the follow-up email who was selected. I'm going to just do one little piece of information before I turn it over to my colleague, Kathy. But I wanted to lay the landscape for you all in terms of why we're having this particular topic, and also the MDIs as a whole in the credit union industry. So there are about 5,000 credit unions as a whole across the country, and about 500 of them, or 518, are MDIs, minority depository institutions. If you're looking by demographic group, the largest portion are those that are designated as Black credit unions or Black or African American credit unions at 255, again, spread throughout the country with their asset size and members listed. The second largest subset of MDIs is Hispanic Americans, so those credit unions serving Latinos and Hispanic Americans. And then the next group that follows is Asian Americans, which is what this topic is about. So we wanted to let you know that there are over 50 credit unions that have self-defined and self-designated themselves as serving Asian Americans. They're led by, so their board is made up of Asian Americans, more than half, as well as their membership. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to my colleague, Kathy. I'll turn it to you.
Great, thank you so much, Monica. Thank you and welcome everyone to Inclusive's Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Month celebratory webinar. We are honored to share this afternoon with you and to share a bit of the story of the rich history of these community groups across the country. And so Monica just shared with you a landscape of the credit union industry, but I thought it would be good to also take a step back and talk about why we celebrate Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Month. Really, this month was created back in 1978 to officially recognize the contributions of Asian American Pacific Islanders to the United States. And while AANP and HPI Heritage Month just started about 40 years ago, the history of these communities started centuries ago. The Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders are indigenous to this country and to these lands. And those of us of Asian descent are also indigenous, and our histories have begun before our ancestors arrived here. But still today, we recognize the diversity of our stories and our different contributions to our movement. these community groups represent more than 25 different countries and languages, from people who look like me of East Asian descent to Southeast Asia, to Micronesia, Hawaii. But what ties us together is our place in this history of our country and our contributions to the community, from the first woman of color serving as Vice President, Kamala Harris, to civil rights movements leaders that have worked across communities of color, such as Yuri Kochiyama, whose birthday we celebrated last year, Grace Lee Boggs, Patsy Mink, who was the first woman of color elected to Congress. And there's just so much to celebrate across these communities and many other stories to share. But we also acknowledge that challenges also exist across these diasporas. Many of us have been witnessing history, both in beautiful ways and challenging ways, such as the rise in hate crimes against people of Asian descent, where we saw really the dehumanization across this diaspora, to the challenges of the COVID pandemic, where small businesses in areas like Chinatown were actually forced to close or experience revenues decreased by 70 to 80%, which is counter to what is called the model minority myth, that people and communities representing people of Asian descent are somehow immune from these challenges, or affluent, or do not face socioeconomic challenges. But what the data shows and what the stories show, especially as we emerge from the pandemic, is that there are challenges across all communities and communities of color, but also through the power of story, we can also rehumanize one another and build wealth in our communities, as well as across our country. And the contributions of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders exist not only across our community economic circles, but also across our culture, from K-pop to Bollywood. And today we're going to share more of these stories, and we have the honor of hearing from 3 credit union leaders and to learn more about their personal stories and how they joined the movement, as well as how credit unions can more expand their inclusion in their financial services and the ways they engage with their communities to be inclusive of the experiences of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders. And so on that note, I'm just going to turn it back over to Monica and our honored speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. We really appreciate that. It was really beautiful table setting, so I appreciate it. We're going to turn over to our panel discussion because, that's why you guys all wanted to, pop in and hear about it. And so I'm so excited to share. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you guys can see everybody's lovely faces and kick it off. So we're going to go ahead and get started. The very first question, so thank you all, Michael, Fred, and Charity, for joining us. The first question is, Charity, could you please tell us about your credit union? Just put it in context in terms of who you're serving and when, a little bit of the history, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. Aloha, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today, all the way from Lānaʻi City, Hawaii. So our credit union, actually, history is very long. In 1923, James Dole, the president of Hawaiian Pineapple Company, bought the island of Lānaʻi, which is the smallest of the 6 islands here in the state of Hawaii, and developed a large portion of it into the world's largest pineapple plantation. This resulted in the diversification of the island's community. It was no longer predominantly Native Hawaiian, but also included many Filipino, Japanese, Chinese, Portuguese, Korean, and Puerto Rican immigrants, most of who came to Hawaii as laborers. There are also a number of Caucasian residents who were general managers and supervisors of plantation operations. As the operation succeeded through the following years, the interest had arose by this team of managers to provide the community with a small means of credit and a safe place to hold their savings. Thus, the HAPCO, or Hawaiian Pineapple Company, Lānaʻi Federal Credit Union, was organized on the island of Lānaʻi in the territory of Hawaii on October 14th, 1938. The plantation operations continued for over 70 years, and the membership of the credit union increased as the community population rose as well. So in 1961, Castle and Cook bought out Dole Foods' interests, which included the island of Lānaʻi. As those plans did not kind of emerge as intended, David Murdoch, who's the owner, bought out Castle and Cook's entire interest in 1985. His plans to revitalize the island's economy resulted in ceasing the pineapple operations, as a lot of the exports were coming in from the other countries, and transition to tourism and development. This transition had ensued the request to amend the charter and bylaws to reflect the new name of the Lānaʻi Federal Credit Union, which we are now known as by today. And most recently, of course, then in 2012, Dole Foods ceased all operations and David Murdoch sold the island of Lānaʻi, or 98% of it, I will say, to the current owner, Larry Ellison, who's the owner of Oracle. Although the culture of the plantation era ceased, the values of our tight-knit community still remain today. We have a population of about 3,000 island residents. Our diverse culture still remains, which today now includes Kashrine Micronesian descents. Parents are opening accounts for their newborn children, and grandparents are still contributing to the savings of their grandchildren's future. And these values are really important to us on how we, the Lānaʻi Federal Credit Union, strategically plan for expansion of our services as it contributes to the multi-general need of our families. So with our current membership at a little over 1,800 members and assets of 37 million, which we started at 25 million in 2016 when I came on board, and still the only credit union on the island, aside from 2 large banking institutions, I feel we have the potential to maximize our membership opportunity of the island population. And as the economy evolves, which we're going to discuss today, I feel that we need to position ourselves to determine what is not only best for the healthiness of our credit union, but really to serve all of our members of specifically the AA, NH, PI cultures. So that's our Lānaʻi Federal Credit Union. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Charity. I feel like maybe it's just me, but I thought I heard some roosters or something.
That's the culture of Lānaʻi.
Yeah. So great. And thank you for all of our friends who are joining from Hawaii. It's like 8 a.m. over there, so we appreciate you so much. Fred, for the next one, tell us about Mabuhay. Sorry about that. I wanted to get it right. Tell us about Mabuhay and how it was founded, why it was founded. It's really fascinating, so please share.
Sure. Mabuhay, everybody. Konnichiwa and aloha. So located in the city of Carson here in Los Angeles County in California, Mabuhay Credit Union is a division of Nikkei Credit Union, which specifically serves the Filipino American and greater community here in the South Bay, Los Angeles area and beyond with their financial services needs. Now, while we physically have been here in the city of Carson for the past 3 years now, we trace our roots back to 1951. Not quite as far back as Lānaʻi, but if you could imagine that time, 1951, this is shortly after World War II. So unfortunately, the Japanese American community was subjected to rampant anti-Asian hate, which unfortunately is still ongoing today. But during that time, a lot of the Japanese American community here in Gardena, particularly in the South Bay, they were rounded up and sent to concentration camps, right, because of our otherness. Now, some of the big names, George Takei, Pat Morita, that everybody's seen on movies, they were subjected to that. But needless to say, after a couple of years in the concentration camps, when they came back home, they had lost everything. And they, unfortunately, again, because of the anti-Asian hate during that time, they could not physically walk into a typical bank, ask for a loan to rebuild their lives, right? So what ended up doing, in the spirit of what we Filipinos call the bayanihan spirit, which is coming together as a community to help each other out, those that had resources, they pulled those resources together. It started off with less than a dozen individuals. They pulled their resources together and started loaning it out within their own community. So again, back in 1951, and that's the genesis of what became Nikkei Credit Union. And fast forward, 60 plus years later, the company has grown. It was over $60 million in assets. But roughly about 10 years or so ago, a lot of the larger Japanese companies here in the South Bay, companies like Mitsubishi, Alpine, Kubota, Toyota, and Honda, they all left Southern California for financial reasons, right? They left and relocated elsewhere. So a lot of the immigration that was coming for those companies, they followed them elsewhere, whether it's to to Texas, Arkansas, or wherever else. And so the company needed to expand. When they did the market research to level up from the Japanese American community, they took a look at the other top 4 Asian groups within the South Bay. So the Chinese, the Koreans, the Indians, and the Filipino communities. And what they realized is, despite the fact that the Filipino community, there's 4.5 million Filipinos here, which basically were coming in either second or third in terms of Asian American population across the country. We didn't really have our own full service financial institution specifically supporting us. So on the side of the company, there was a need to expand, and the Phil-Am community is very underserved. So we physically opened this branch actually 3 years ago this month. And on June 11th, that's when we had our grand opening, which was the day before the Philippine Independence Day. And the way we basically mapped that out was, the day before in the Philippines, that's the day of here. So that's when we physically had our grand opening in Carson. And so right now we're at about 83 million in assets. Overall, we have over 5,000 members between the Nikkei and the Mabuhay brand, if you will. It's one company. Mabuhay is a DBA of Nikkei, but particularly within the Mabuhay division. In the last 3 years, we opened up 600 members here. And we've created, and I believe this is a follow-up question later, but we've created about 40 partners within the community. So yeah, I mean, it basically was a perfect marriage between the company needing to expand and the Phil-Am community really needing the products and services that we offer.
Thank you so much. Michael, please tell us about your credit union, Northeast Community in San Francisco.
Well, Northeast Community Federal Credit Union, based in San Francisco. Why is it called Northeast? Well, it's Northeast because it originated in the northeast corner of the city, that which contained both the Tenderloin neighborhood, which was back then considered the worst neighborhood of San Francisco, and Chinatown and North Beach. So that's why it's called Northeast. But its original charter was a community development credit union charter back in 1981. And we're a smaller institution. Our charter specifically says that anyone who lives, works, or has associational ties within our geographic field of membership can be a member of Northeast. So it really spoke to our mission too, of that inclusion, but also serving the underserved. Now, we were born during some of the highest periods of inflation that occurred in the United States. Back in 1980, when we were just getting our charter, inflation was 14.5%. Compare that to now. Well, what it was it further marginalized our members, and we saw that small borrowers and small savers were being hurt tremendously in terms of their buying power and access. And access, not only in terms of just physical access, but actual use, meaning there are handicaps such as language accessible issues. They needed things in language, they needed things in verbal, written, culturally nuanced financial services and products. So, but they also had their American dreams. Their cornerstones, meaning through the family. It was through self-employment, it was through home ownership and education. And that's why most definitely we have always focused, really, our motto too is that no one is too small to be served, right? And that is why it was so important for us to reach out to say establish a branch in the Tenderloin, because in the Tenderloin, at that time, there were no regulated institutions with branches in the Tenderloin. And in Chinatown, where you had so many financial institutions, but who was helping the smaller borrower, the smaller saver? That's where we felt. And And basically too, I mean, I got involved because one day, I mean, the idea sort of like resonated. You know, I just happened to walk through the doors of a Center for Urban Ethnic Affairs in Washington, DC, saw a pamphlet. It said, CDCUs are a path to empowerment. And so then taking that pamphlet, organizing with the support of my employer, then Asian Incorporated, a nonprofit, organized a group of nonprofits that then said, let's start this. And back then, you secured pledges, right? And pledges were like, oh, here's this postcard. Yes, you will help support the credit union. Well, we worked at it and worked at it. And certainly through a business plan, certainly got our charter back in 1981, right during that very problematic period. Yeah, Lawrence Canal. And in our first month, we received like, we collected $24,000. That's how we opened it up. So today we're like in about 12.5 million. We're growing. We're seeking to further serve the underserved with additional financial services and products. But we're also diversified. Our demographics in the 83 census tracts in our field of membership in San Francisco, 36% are Asian, 22% are Hispanic, 7% are African American, and the balance of being white and Native American to a very smaller degree. So we have a concentration, but like it all, we serve the underserved. And particularly in terms of financial transactions, when we do lifeline financial transactions, we are providing services in terms of manual ACH, check cashing, cash activities. And in the last year or so, even though we're 1,200 members, our Tenderloin branch generated 26,000 transactions in 2021, right? So it does meet that need. And certainly in terms of on our lending side, we address our cornerstones, those in small business, those in housing, et cetera. So that's where we are today. Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. It's always wonderful to hear from credit union leaders that founded the credit union. So, you know, really wonderful hearing your perspective as a board member, but also being there in those early years as well. So I'm going to turn it back to Charity because I want to pick back up because, you know, a lot of people might think, you know, why are there MDIs serving Asian Americans? Are there any special needs? And so the question I have is, what types of products and services are you offering to your community based on their needs and requests? So Charity, I don't know if you're still able to.
I am here, okay. But for some reason my camera it's telling me failed to start the video camera. So I'm not certain why that's happening. Okay. So for years, the Lānaʻi Federal Credit Union offered only shared savings accounts at the start of its organization and fully secured loans for members. But since the start of my tenure in 2016, we've been fortunate for grant programs from Inclusive, obviously previously the Federation, and the NCUA to launch things such as our very first website with online account access, as well as Bonsai, which is an online financial education platform for all ages. This year, we're launching our very first checking account program that will be no fee, dividend earning, and will include a debit card service. So we're excited for that. And since we've also revised our loan policies to include a tiered credit scoring model to offer consumer loans to all qualifying members from credit builder up to platinum, we realized that it was basically a one tier where you had to have, of course, a perfect credit score. And in serving our members, we found that we weren't really, we weren't aiding those in need. And most specifically, I will say that our Filipino or our minority members weren't aware of what building credit was. So we had to expand the service to include that. We're also currently working on offering citizenship loans for members to aid when families petition members from home countries such as the Philippines or Micronesia. And then our next goal is also to offer real estate lending for our members, whether they're a first-time home buyer or homeowners needing a home equity loan. And then into the long-term plan, we don't currently offer business lending, but we are looking into that because we do have the handful of small businesses here on Lānaʻi.
Great, thank you, Charity. Fred, can you tell us about your products and services? And especially if you have any, I know in your case you have unique about the language needs so if you could share about that as well.
Sure. Well, Mabuhay and Nikkei, we are full service. We do offer both deposit accounts as well as a variety of loan products. One thing that we did ensure when we opened this new division specific for the Filipino community, we knew very early on that we were going to have a remittance aspect. That's something that the Filipino community has been used to. Even before the full service financial institutions came around to help them. A lot of Filipino Americans here in the US are used to obviously working here and earning money, but they actually, on a very regular basis, they would send home a big chunk of that to family and other loved ones back in the Philippines. So that was something that we knew early on we were going to be doing. We didn't necessarily plan on recreating the wheel, but we made it a point to ensure that we were able to identify and to create a partnership with a remittance company to be able to do that. And then speaking of partnerships, we've been able to create partnerships with about 40 select employer groups or SEGs and association partners. Because on the Nikkei side of things, when it was first founded, essentially their field of membership was somebody of Japanese descent. Fast forward 60 plus years later, we can't just outright say someone of Filipino descent. So we had to actively create, that's actually part of my responsibility, was to proactively build these partnerships within the community. These are companies, associations, and organizations that when they have that partnership with us, their employees or their members are then eligible to open an account with us as well. And then, in terms of other ways that we've been able to serve the community, particularly during, as a response to the pandemic, very early on, actually, back in February of 2020, before we even got into lockdown, we created a pandemic preparedness plan. So it didn't quite hit us unprepared. We offered disaster and pandemic assistance. So we deployed a program to aid our members, which ended up resulting in over $4 million in loan payment extension, as well as emergency loans. And then we really beefed up our remote services as well. Actually, on the staff side here, we basically made it to where we had an updated schedule where we can spend alternating weeks working from home to mitigate, the risk on the staff, but also, really build up our online remote access as well. So those were some of the things that we were able to build up. On the JA side, it's really been more on the deposits side that is really being used the most. The investments in the deposit side. On the PhilAm side, it's a little bit more on the loans as well as the remittance side of things that we've been maximizing.
Yeah, thank you, Fred, for making that distinction between the Japanese Americans and then the Filipino Americans with the saving versus sending the money home. That's a really kind of important distinction that you're seeing and observing on the ground. Michael, tell us about Northeast products and services. Like, you have more than your full service credit union activities. I know you guys are also deeply embedded into the community as well. So anything you want to share on that front?
Right. Well, very much, we understand the barriers and impairments to financial services and lending. That's why we really focus on language accessibility and culturally nuanced financial products and services. Particularly at our branches, both in Chinatown and the Tenderloin, we have people that are fluent both verbally and also in written language. So we cover all the Chinese dialects. We cover some of the Southeast Asian languages, in particular Vietnamese and other languages as well. What we found too is that when we started off, we knew small borrowers were very much handicapped. But then again, we also understood that if we could carve out niches for them, as well as in regards to mortgages, because home ownership was certainly then and now a pathway for their wealth creation and assets that they could borrow off of. So certainly in the beginning, we really focused on small businesses who needed to refinance their mortgages or take out second mortgages for small business purposes. And through that, we developed a track record in regards to our mortgage lending, as well as micro enterprise businesses lending and consumer lending. Because also, particularly in the Tenderloin, where we had huge concentrations of very low income populations that were being preyed upon and by predatory payday lenders, we offered an anti-payday lending product as well as a credit rebuild product. And certainly that has really developed our support within that particular branch and all. But we also understood too that financial services that you have to continuously adopt and adapt. And so most certainly we are now in that area where we are going in terms of mobile applications, in terms of our financial services, and certainly loan origination platforms there. So as we have transitioned, we have found that most definitely to reach those that are limited English proficient and financially digitally challenged, that we need to provide, say, mobile apps that can also be provided in language. So we have actually contracted out. We're going to have a mobile app. Already it's available in English and Spanish, but we're having them develop the app in Chinese as well. So that when they see our app, they'll have 3 buttons and you choose the language of your choice and instantly it converts. We feel that that's very important, but to go hand in hand, we need to do development services, particularly financial literacy, particularly in terms of digital competency, because many of our members do. A great number do not have email, do not have access to desktops or even laptops, but they do have smartphones. So that's why it is so very important. Similarly, also, we are pioneering satellite branches, because if we have internet banking as well as mobile apps, we're furthering the aspirations of our nonprofit members who would like to establish satellite branches to service their members, one in particular being in Sacramento, largely Hispanic population. So that's very important to really begin to serve financial deserts out there, as well as to certainly nurture the growth within our geographic field of membership in San Francisco, which has since expanded to the entire east side of the city as well. So that's where we are.
Thank you, Michael. I'm so fascinated because you do serve such a large portion of Asian Americans, but then you also have the Hispanic community. You mentioned 33%, 22%. So can you maybe share how many bilingual staff, like do you have Spanish speaking staff as well, like at kind of comparable rates or something? I think it's just really fascinating that you're doing multiple communities and serving the underserved.
Yeah, that is an area where we know that we need to upgrade our language capabilities. There, I think we have limited Spanish speaking capabilities, but as we branch out, as we further our partnerships, we will be able to enhance that. And that is our plan. Our whole plan this current year is to really focus on the growth and expansion of the things that I've mentioned, particularly additional languages.
Yeah, great, thank you. Fred kicked us off on the pandemic question. I want to hear more, because it was originally your question, Michael, about tell the group. Nobody has heard. It was just us talking. So tell us how your credit union got through the pandemic. Give us the feeling on the ground of what was happening, what your community needed, and how you guys kept up operations. And then I'll pass it to the others. But if you could kick us off, Michael.
Sure. When the pandemic first hit and there was a total shutdown in terms of business closures out there, Chinatown was devastated. it was totally shuttered. Everything shut down. And then things began to flow outward like PPP loans. And what we saw was that people that were connected could easily access the PPP loan system through their bankers or through other parties, or they had agents that they could secure. What we found that the smaller businesses in Chinatown didn't know. The lines of communication did not exist because basically they relied on the in-language communications, and it wasn't reaching them. And in fact, if the agency was relying on emails and all, if you didn't have an email, so you were somewhat out of it. So Lily saw that. And Lily then said, okay, we need to organize volunteers to help people qualify for PPP. We may not make the loans ourselves, but we will refer them to banks that we do know in the area. And so then she said, all right, I'm gonna take the staff, I'm gonna take the volunteers, and we're gonna focus on helping these hundreds of small businesses. We're gonna close our loan window, maintain our lifeline financial transactions for everyone and all. And let's focus on this now, because this is a crisis. This is economic disruption at its worst. And so they did. And they did a remarkable job to the point then that they certainly were able also to translate that to certainly helping these smaller businesses qualify for local city grants, you know, in terms of parklets, in terms of working capital awning, as well as state of California funding, to the point that she served hundreds, and certainly created a network also, a WeChat network of people that would certainly respond to say, hey, you need to submit, you need to get everything done, and help us help you, right? To the point of her success being what they were. The mayor of San Francisco, London Breed, declared on March 31st, 2021, Lily Low Day. And that was because of the incredible number of smaller businesses she helped, the incredible goodwill she created between these businesses and the locality, who was also distributing grants and all, to the point now that because the city is so focused on really getting the assistance out there, Northeast is a conduit which, when the city approves, say, a grant, and because if you had to go through layer after layer within the city to get your money, that wasn't going to happen in a timely manner. So the city contracted with Northeast, say, we've approved the grant. Can you advance the funds? And we will reimburse you at the end of the month. And so we've been working on that. And this way, we're able to get the money out there in a most timely manner, which is so very important to these struggling businesses. Even today, the residual is that she has also organized additional small business groups within the area and also extends across the whole city, so that they are now becoming more viable actors. They realize that access to capital are so very important issues, timeless in so many ways, from the date we began under our charter to now. You know, certainly the issues still continue, and certainly the backdrop too of the anti-Asian violence certainly has complicated things. And she has also helped organize the community in regards to certainly addressing the American Disability Act scam lawsuits that have affected so many smaller businesses, as well as certainly increasing access to capital through other venues as well. Yes, so that has been our response, our continuing response. So now we are at this point where we really want to focus on growth within the credit union and within our community to continue our serving the underserved.
Thank you, Michael. Charity, I'm going to turn it to you. Give us a sense of what was happening in your community with the pandemic. We're so curious what it was like in Lānaʻi City.
Well, Lānaʻi, as resilient as we are, an interesting thing about our island is we only have basically two entryways to the island, via air or a ferry to Maui. We get a weekly barge once a week that serves our community grocery stores, our fuel supplies, and our, basically everyday necessities. So during the pandemic, we were pretty much left what I would call Gilligan's Island. So as a community, we had to stand together. And it's interesting because it kind of dates back to history. I'm going to really quickly talk about it. In 1951, there was a great strike. It was a union strike where basically the plantation workers were on a 7-month hiatus strike due to unfair wages for the pine workers. And it resulted in strengthening the consolidation of the current Local 142 union that serves our community today. And similar to the pandemic, the community stood together, local grocery stores and restaurants, as much as, you know, we had a scare. We stayed safe pretty much the whole time because our island was pretty much blocked off from incoming visitors. So we stayed safe, but we pulled together. We're also very fortunate that the owner of our island did actually pay the wages of our employees into the first couple months of the pandemic, which then allowed the roll into the unemployment that the state had offered during that time. As the credit union, we saw the need to aid our members with a loan deferral program during that time. And we had lengthened that to at least 6 months of a loan deferral. And we were very fortunate that we, you know, our members, we did not have any charge-offs. So unlike other entities who may have experienced job losses, we were very fortunate in that arena. I took advantage of grants through the NCUA to offer gift certificates to our local grocery store. We have one grocery store that's owned by a local Asian family. And so kind of like a recycling into the community, right? We're supporting the grocery store as well as supporting our members. So, you know, we went through the pandemic. We have since opened up. But what I really can say is that the culture in the community, just like we experienced in this great strike in 1951, we stood together, we stood strong, and we are resilient. And we continue to move forward through that and through the challenges.
Thank you, Charity. Fred, I'm turning it to you. Would love to hear if you wanted to add anything else about the pandemic, or I can do a follow-up in terms of any type of barriers or challenges that your credit union or Asian American community is facing that you'd want to raise up. You can take either one.
Well, yeah, I did mention some of the things that we've done, you know, as a response specifically to the pandemic, which both of my colleagues also touched on. Another way that we've also been serving the community during and despite the pandemic, we definitely made it a point to recognize our frontline heroes, whether they be, you know, medical workers or essential workers. You know, within our community, there's a high percentage of Filipino healthcare workers. So that was certainly something that we knew we had to recognize and to honor them for the work that they're doing. So we did several actually different food drives for medical frontliners as well as first responders. There were 4 different hospitals in the area that we served Filipino food, along with a total of 8 different fire stations. We also, you know, in response to the anti-Asian hate, you know, that wave of hate that happened, we also supported, you know, the Alliance Against Asian Hate Rally and Vigil, as well as the Defend Our Elders self-defense workshop. And then, you know, to answer that second question, I think the biggest challenge that particularly the Filipino community has is the financial literacy. And I'm not entirely sure if this is something that is common across other Asian, you know, groups as well. But within the Filipino community, the extent of financial education that we receive from our family, from our parents, really is go to school, study hard, get a good job. Beyond that, there's no additional, you know, training really that we've received. So we have been very active in organizing and supporting a variety of different financial literacy seminars and workshops. So I personally have been fortunate enough to have spoken at a wide variety of different seminars and workshops, ranging all the way from professionals to students, college, high school, and even middle school students. Just, giving them the basics of financial literacy and really just kind of initiating that conversation because unfortunately, for much of the rest of the real world, money really isn't something that is talked about, never mind on over the dinner table. So that's something that, financial literacy, we created a vlog specifically for, financial education. So that's something that I feel goes well beyond, the deposits and the loans products that we have here. But it is something that we are also doing to help serve the community. So it's just another avenue that, as our Vice President Jay Lee says, we're not just a financial institution. We're a community organization that just so happens to deal with finance. So in that sense, we want to be as inclusive as possible in terms of the ways that we assist the community, certainly with regards to their finances, but it's not limited to that. So thank you.
Thank you, Fred. So I love hearing about your addressing and supporting the first responders, the healthcare workers, but also that we are, and you are all, we are being our members, are financial first responders too. And the stuff that Michael was talking about with the PPP and making sure the community members were able to access these things that were not translated, not available to them. They didn't have emails, as well as the work that you're doing and in charity too. So moved and inspired. Michael, are there other barriers or challenges that you want to lift up, that you want people to be aware of, that, is in particular regarding the credit union or Asian American community related to credit unions?
Well, certainly language accessibility to financial services and products. I mean, having those accommodations, being able to do so. So we really think the mobile app in terms of being in language will be a very important steps towards that. Definitely financial digital literacy is so very important, because now as we go to the cloud, as we transition to the remote deposits, remote transactions ourselves, having that is so going to be very important to those that are very vulnerable. You look at the elderly, you look at small businesses, smaller businesses, you want to move them away towards the cash transactions, things that would make them vulnerable out there in the in society, wrongfully so. And in addition to, credit unions, by being financial service providers of transactions and in terms of lending, are ideal, or an ideal fit to be certified CDFIs because of what they bring there. They're not just strictly making loans, they're not strictly doing certain other transactions. They bring it all together to serve the underserved. And because of that, I would really mention, at least in general, certainly within minority communities, within AAPIs, that is so essential to become a US Treasury certified CDFI. So very important because of all the doors it opens up in terms of access to resources, etc. And in particular, we're talking about, it is so very important that Asian Americans also find their role in all of this. I mean, under US Treasury, under the Emergency Capital Impact Program, Asian Americans were specifically mentioned as a minority population, a targeted population that needed assistance. Well, sometimes there are miscommunications, or certainly things don't align correctly in regards to identifying these same populations, because particularly under, I think Inclusive has highlighted that other targeted populations under CDFI rules and regulations are the processing of certifications for them has been a challenge, right? But also, if you look at the definition of other targeted population, it includes African American, it includes Hispanics, it includes Native Americans and others, but it does not include Asian Americans. So certainly, and I did pose that question years and years ago, I found that it's not statutory, it is regulatory in nature. Well, if it's regulatory in nature, if Treasury identifies Asian Americans as another targeted population. Shouldn't also say the CDFI fund. I mean, because of this certain disconnect here. And I'll use the example. If I was, and this was told to me by a CDFI, another CDFI early on, it sort of dawned on me. If you had an Asian American disadvantaged business operating in a majority African American census tract, because African Americans automatically are given the other target population, if a CDFI made a loan to that AAPI small business, it would count towards their goals, their qualified lending. Now you take the same business and you put it into a majority Asian American census tract. If a CDFI made a loan to that same AAPI business, it would not qualify in terms of qualified lending. Now I think that's a different standard. In fact, I even think it's somewhat inequitable. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed. And I don't think it's, maybe there are some things in the process that are happening that, I certainly don't know about. But I would say that, who knows, maybe an executive order, because it being regulatory in nature, maybe that can cure it all. Maybe there could be some Asian American congressionals could see that, the time for such disparities is long past. Let's look at the remedies. And I think those are very solid remedies, because getting more certified CDFIs within a credit union industry that serve Asian Americans, all other minorities, is so very important. We need to increase the diversity there. Plus also, it is so very important to understand and utilize the Community Reinvestment Act in regards that it can benefit, say, credit unions insofar as within the ranking system and all, supporting CDFIs is a high priority. You may not be a 501c3 nonprofit corporation to receive, say, certain grant assistance, but you can be a CDFI to access that assistance, whether it's through loans, whether it's through grants, deposits, etc. So I think that's an incredible resource that if we understand, because right now it is also undergoing modernization to incorporate various remote activities, expanding the definition. Well, here now is the opportunity to really focus, not only on your geographic field membership, but on your remote activities in regards to deposits, services, etc. So I think those are very important factors that certainly, if we can overcome certain of these barriers, then I think the growth for AAPI Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander credit unions can certainly benefit tremendously in regards to removal of such barriers, but also in cooperation with other credit unions. I think overall, we create the rising sea. We create our own wave. And I think that is so important that we do.
Thank you, Michael, for raising up that issue of advocacy for us, and that there are policy changes that should be made to address inequity. Charity, I wanted to open it up and give you a chance if there was anything on barriers or challenges you wanted to share, or if you'd like to turn to successes and opportunities. And for those who are listening, we did extend this particular webinar to 3:15, so I'm going to open it up for questions. So go ahead and type your Q&A if you have any questions that you want to ask the speakers while they're on the line. We do have up until 3:15. If you have to hop, we fully understand the session is being recorded. But Charity, either barriers or opportunities.
Okay, and I just wanted to tag on with Fred as he spoke earlier. Really, it's extending our beyond the credit union services like they talked about. For myself and in our small credit union, for us particularly, really is a language barrier. We do not have staff on hand that are bilingual. However, we partner closely with organizations within our community to assist. In those ways, Department of Immigration, we have a community health center with bilingual employees that aid family members when members who come into the credit union seeking additional services. And then another barrier I think is also for us is bridging the gap between the younger generation to the older generation. As Fred mentioned, a lot of our employees, members that come over to Lānaʻi, they work hard to support their families in the Philippines. And we want to help the older generation to build the credit. And then we also want to help the younger generation who come from the Philippines to gain the financial literacy. So we're working closely with partners to seek to do community outreach to offer these services. So our opportunities, for instance, we have a Lānaʻi Filipino Community Coalition. It's a board that I sit on. It was part of the Lānaʻi Filipino club that was founded probably about 40 years ago and kind of laid to rest, and we're reviving it now as we start to see the need to serve these types of community members. So our opportunities are great working under State United Filipino Community Coalition as well, the UFCC. So reaching out to the other islands. We have colleague credit unions who assisted us as we don't offer business accounts. I forwarded and referred them over to colleague credit unions who serve our community to allow them to apply for PPP loans. So we're thankful for that. We still have a lot of room to grow as a small credit union, but for without services such as the inclusive and CUA, and like Michael mentioned, our goal is to become CDFI certified. So that opens the doors and the floodgates to allow us opportunities to grow, to ensure that we can serve our AA and HPI community members for years to come.
So we did have one question that came in. I wanted to acknowledge it from an audience member, Hazel May. She says she's curious if the MDI certification gives any additional benefits for credit unions that obtain it. So MDI status is not necessarily a certification. So it's self-reported. The credit unions who are all here on the line, and just in general, you tell NCUA on your CU profile that you are an MDI, if in fact your demographics reflect that. And it's a combination of your board, so the board membership being 50% or more, communities of color, so any of those that were mentioned, African American, Hispanic American, Asian American, or Native. And then your membership or potential members, if you have 50% or more. And if you can comfortably report that, because that's your makeup, then you'll just let NCUA know and you can be an MDI. It hasn't originally probably had as much of influence, but now there are some programs that are being targeted to MDIs. So for example, there was an initiative with some of the Treasury funding. It was originally called the Minority Lending Program. It's still $1.75 billion that hasn't been released yet. It's now called the Equitable Recovery Program, and it's through Treasury and CDFI fund. But it is intended in the back end to be for communities of color and those that were deeply impacted by COVID. So that's one way that is being leveraged and kind of used. I don't see too many other questions coming in from the audience. So, open it up. Well, I'll turn it back to the panelists in terms of opportunities. So many of our credit unions are not Asian credit unions, but they want to be allies. That's why they're in the call. That's why they're curious. So I want to maybe start with Fred, if you want to kick us off, about ways that non-Asian credit unions can either be supportive or be more inclusive at their own credit union, even if their whole credit union isn't Asian. But how can they be a better, credit union, more inclusive, more supportive? So any tips, advice?
Sure, yeah, like inclusivity is just in general, it's a positive thing, right? Now, a unique situation that I can personally speak on is with regards to the Filipino American community. And I actually deem this to be a little bit of a double-edged sword because of the Philippines' history, having spent 50 years as a colony of the US and maintaining that close relationship even post independence. a lot of Filipinos, when they arrive to the US, have, let's just say, to a certain extent, have acclimated to, not just the language, but the American culture as well. So I say that's a double-edged sword, because obviously it's good that when new immigrants come in, they can more easily integrate into the community at large. But the negative to that is that what works for the mainstream could potentially work for the Filipino American community here. So in that sense, there really isn't a need for mainstream companies to specifically target and advertise to the Filipino American community, right? As opposed to, I know Michael mentioned this a lot, for communities that have limited English proficiency, if they wanted to sell to that community, they're going to have to advertise in whatever language that community speaks, right? But because, again, as a whole, the Filipino community does, speak, read, and write in English, that's not as high of a priority. So in that regard, the way to be an ally would be not just obviously to have Filipino members or staff members in the fold, but also to proactively work on ways to be able to collaborate and to have partnerships with these entities. And again, that's one thing that I'm doing, is that within the past 3 years, we've already created roughly about 40 partners, companies, association, and organizations. We do have the official SEG and or association partnership with them, but it's not just limited to that. I mean, obviously those organizations and associations, we're going to be supporting them financially as a credit union. But when it comes to hosting events or just supporting community events in general, we don't limit ourselves to that. If there's ways that we can better serve our community, certainly our credit union members, but the community at large, in the face of whatever is going on out there, whether it's COVID related, whether it's the anti-Asian hate, we are going to be pursuing that collaborative approach. It's collaboration over competition. So in that regard, it's always going to be a plus when you can say that organizations can diversify themselves and also be more inclusive. As a whole, that's always going to be a net positive in my book. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. Before I get the others to respond, Kathy, did you have anything you wanted to add on the MDI status? I just want to give you the room. Sorry about that.
Sure. I think there are several designations that credit unions should look at, especially if you are serving underserved communities. So one, there's power, just as our speakers shared with us, in knowing your community needs and who your members are and what their needs are. So in addition to minority designation, also looking into CDFI certification, right, that Michael and Charity had spoken about, as well as low income designation. I want to share that, and just like 2 other points. One is that we are at the nexus of a new chapter in history, and there are more partners and organizations and agencies that are interested in advancing racial equity. And so we're seeing new programs evolve, new partnerships. There's also the Asian American Foundation and different circles and resources that are developing. When it comes to the specific question that Hazel raised about minority designation, I'd also highlight that under the Treasury's, several programs and initiatives were launched that Monica mentioned. While the window for this one has passed, $9 billion was allocated for CDFI and minority designated institutions, at the end of 2020. So while that has passed, still I'm sharing that by way of example to say that, one, we should be able to tell the story of the members and the communities that we serve, but 2, there are being resources that are being developed to support these racial equity initiatives. Secondly, and we could maybe send this in a follow-up, I believe next week, NCUA is hosting a webinar on specific programs and benefits for MDI and CDFI certified credit unions. So we could share that after the webinar as well. And so that's the, I think, direct answer to Hazel's question. But overall, I'm just listening to our speakers. There is power and such importance understanding your community's needs and member needs. And so just that encouragement to everyone on the line today to look for those opportunities and to understand all the different stories of those that we have engaged with through our credit union.
Thank you, Kathy. No, that's so important. And for those that we will send the links and we will send the recording and everything after, we'll put info about that June 2nd NCUA CDFI webinar. Michael or Charity, I'm opening it up. I'll start with Michael. Do you want to add anything on the allyship question?
Yeah, well, I think it also speaks to the mission of the credits that we're serving everyone, anyone and everyone that qualifies. So I'd just like to mention some examples of that. One is that for our credit union, yes, we very much have supported small businesses, provided credit so that they continue in their contract work. We have certainly supported homeowners, et cetera. And there are many nonprofits that are also engaged that help us do so. But also too, just look at the whole fabric of everyone out there. We have testimonials from people who have been incarcerated, who have said, you know, if not for your services, we would have been very challenged in terms of helping our families get through these times. We have that. We also have homeless members who give us their PO box, and we do the transactions for them. And they come in on a very regular basis and say, you know, if you weren't here, we'd be very, very hard put to really go day to day. Yeah. We've also had vets. I had an example of a vet who had $50,000 benefit check. He was brought into our credit union by his legal representative who said, this vet wanted to go to a check casher, and that check casher was going to have him fill out 50 money orders. And that would have really hit substantially the amount of funds he would have had. And he didn't know. Financial literacy just wasn't there. And so we said, okay, we'll take care of that. He doesn't have to go that route at all. Yeah. Plus also homeowners. We've had situations where, okay, we're helping you finance your home, right? You're a first-time homeowner. Your whole family has collected the money at all. You need to come in so we can certainly vet the money, you know. They come in, you know, maybe they're 50% loan to value, you know. And we say, okay, where's the money? And then they bring out these bags, these bags of cash that apparently were buried, right? And so it really speaks to really the resourcefulness that if you give people a chance or so, that they can be resourceful, they can be responsible, and that you can serve and meet their needs. So I think these examples are instructive of how we are in that unique position right now as credit unions to continue to do so and do more.
Thank you, Michael. Definitely getting us fired up here. Charity, any kind of final things on allyship? And then I'll close with the one last question to Fred that came through. But yeah, anything that you're thinking of, or any final remarks or thoughts that you're thinking of?
I know you can't see me, but I'm back here like preaching and saying amen, amen, Michael. But and that's very similar to what we did in our community. And we have stories of our members who have lost family members and are unable to financially provide soundness for their family. We've served. We have stories of members coming and crying to us, telling us, you know, thank you so much. If it wasn't for you giving me that chance, you know, for a loan or just even a startup of savings to help support their families. We've had members, I help the younger members, although we don't do home loans, you know, I've helped them kind of prepare themselves. And then I'm also a notary public. I'm a signing agent in the community, and they come to me months down the line telling me, you know, Auntie, thank you so much for helping me to prepare to build my credit score to save up to build my savings, and they're now homeowners. So it's very inspirational. It takes us to heart many things that we do in the community. And although our only competition are two larger banks, I work closely with the bank managers here. You know, if they can't serve as a large banking institution, they'll come to the credit union. And if we aren't unable to do that, we extend that. Hey, go ahead and give this credit union a call. They offer this type of loan. They offer this type of service. They may be able to help you. You know, and so like Michael and Fred say, it's a community outreach. It really takes all of us as a community in our areas. And although Hawaii, pretty much all the credit unions are MDI, my own personal success was reaching out to other credit unions when I attended an inclusive convention, and reaching out to those who serve the Black population and understanding what they do, even if it's a different type of minority, they have the same goals and missions. And so I really recommend everyone to just, you know, continue to serve in the community and reach out to the networks out there, non-credit union as well, because I think that's going to be really important on how we grow and serve our minority members and communities. So thank you.
Thank you, Charity. So Fred, a question came in from our colleague Netta. She was wondering about the senior self-defense training. How is it structured? How is it received? Would love to hear about it, particularly with all the hate crimes. We love that you were proactive about trying to, you know, address it.
It actually was really well received. The main organizer reached out to me because he knew I was pretty active here in the city of Carson. And for that day, we basically had Guru Diana Lee Losanto. For those of you that follow The Mandalorian, she played the magistrate. And in terms of, you know, just history in general, she is a daughter of Danny Losanto and the goddaughter of Bruce Lee. So she is like, you know, she is big in, you know, just in movies in general, but also within the martial arts subculture. And essentially, she worked with a school that we have, a Filipino martial arts school that we have out here, Pamana Kali, to essentially show the community how to use, you know, like canes, umbrellas, or any other things you might have in your possession to defend yourself in the event of an attack. And unfortunately, that came about because we held the rally and the vigil last March of 2021 here in Carson. I helped organize that one too. Unfortunately, very shortly after that, there was another incident that happened in New York where an older Filipina, I think she was like in her mid to late 60s, she was kicked in the face. So we felt like we had to kind of take it a step further and actually equip our community to defend themselves. And that was actually taken, that was received very, very well by the community. Matter of fact, that was actually the first time that the Consul General of the Philippines was able to visit here in Carson. He was just appointed to Los Angeles. So that was an opportunity for him to make his first visit here. And the goal was to use that as a template to have other similar workshops using other potential teachers in other areas in the country as well. I mean, I hate to say it, obviously it'd be better if we didn't have a need for it, but it's gotten to the point where there is a need because of what's happening out there. I mean, not just physical assaults, but also all these different shootings and just violence in general that's happening, directly affecting our community. So essentially, for Asian Americans in particular, obviously, including the Native Hawaiians and the Pacific Islanders in general, essentially we're facing twin pandemics of COVID as well as kind of the hate that some individuals out there are happening. And I personally have been involved in a Zoom call like this where we were Zoom bombed. I don't know if anybody's experienced that before. Somebody had access to the logins and then they just started yelling, I hate immigrants, blah, blah, blah. So it was just I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of hate and vitriol out there. But, you know, on our end, we're just doing what we can to educate our community and hopefully give them tips as well. And at the end of the day, in terms of, you know, anti-Asian hate, the mantra is, if you see something, say something. You don't have to necessarily, you know, physically put yourself in the middle, but call them out, whether it's, you know, verbally or otherwise. But it's, you know, it's supporting our community from within at the end of the day.
Oh, thank you, Fred. That's really, it's important that you did that, but also that you're giving us concrete examples of how our credit unions and how we can all be more helpful. There were a lot of good links and comments in the chat for folks. I hope you guys were following along, but it will also be part of the recording. I believe you can see that those sorts of comments on the side. What I will do is we do have to close because we're over the time. So I want to thank the panelists. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Fred and Charity, for all joining us today for this conversation. It's been such a rich, you know, hour and 15 minutes. I think there's definitely interest in doing more of these in the future, and so we'd love to, you know, keep you all engaged. And also, I saw some Hazel has some activity in terms of a network that she's trying to engage as well of AAPI members. So I'm going to close, but in the slide deck, we will have contact info for everybody who was on the call today. If you have any follow-up questions as you're mulling over and thinking about it. But thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon and happy Asian American Heritage Month. Have a good one. Bye.
Goodbye. Goodbye, all.
Hi, everybody.